18. The poet is the notes for today. True, false. There are not enough context clues to tell. 19. The nightmare is the context. True, false. 20. In 100 to 250 words, interpret within the psychosocial historical context of the white supremacist, cis-sexist heteropatriarchy the authorial intent of the following passage. She said no. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So, a memoirist, a novelist, and Marianne Zoll went to Norway. I'm just kidding. So I'm so delighted to introduce Shauna K. Rodenberg. I once heard Ann Patchett introduce Pat Conroy, and I thought, if she is as excited as I am to do this, and if you know me, I love Pat Conroy, so I feel like a little fangirling going on here or something. But I didn't know Shauna K. very well until 45 minutes ago. So I'm going to tell you what you can find out on your own, then I'm going to tell you something else. She's from Letcher County, Kentucky. She's a mother, a grandmother, an English instructor, and a registered nurse. She's an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in Consequence, Elle, Salon, The Village Voice, The Bennington Review, Kudzu, and Pine Mountain Sand and Gravel. Her memoir, Kin, tells the story of her childhood among a multi-layered, misrepresented people and how she navigated the perilous balance between who she is and who she will become. So that's what we could all know about her. But she came squealing in here tonight on 2 tires, barely able to get her dinner before she was more than willing to talk to me a little bit about herself. She had her daughter and 2 grandchildren in tow. She got them settled first, then came to get some supper. And when she talked about what she wants her reader to walk away with after she has shared what she's going to share tonight, which is some new work, is that she wants to complicate Appalachian stereotypes. And so with the most winsome kindness and grace and finesse of a pro, she shared some information about that with me. And it is my delight to introduce Shauna K. Welcome.
Y'all are going to think I'm lazy, but I'm not. I just fidget too much. So it's better if I just sit down. That's fine. It is such an honor to be reading between Melissa and Georgella. I feel like, look at that, running with the big dogs, right? Like the best bread, and like bar-esque bologna right there in the middle. Or like you don't even have bologna, so you cut a couple of hot dogs in half and use them. So, I always tell people I get a little breathy, I get nervous when I read. If I pass out, I'm a nurse, I'll know what to do. I think the only content warning that I need to give is there is infant demise in this, so be prepared for that. It is new. It's about my grandma, my maternal grandma, sort of written in close third person about her experience. It opens with a poem that she wrote that I have a copy of. I think that's all you need to know. It's called I Would Like to Have Just One Friend. Jackhorn, Kentucky, 1940. I would like to have just one friend, a friend so tried and true, one that wouldn't walk away every time I was blue. Yes, I'd like to have someone to lean on when the going gets rough, someone who wouldn't leave me alone and just say, I've had enough. That's Ava Mae Baker Addington. She settled into a chair on the porch and pulled the brown glass bottle of phenobarbital tablets from the left pocket of her limp house dress. Her cigarettes and Zippo were in the right. She squinted at the sky, which was the color of calamine, then at the label, unscrewed the cap, and swallowed a tablet without water. Payday was a long way off, and there was no RC in the house, and she hated the taste of water, especially in Jackhorn. "How are you, May?" was all the doctor had asked, but she'd embarrassed herself, squirming, stuttering, choking back tears about how she'd lost her temper with the boys again that morning for ruining their clothes before she got them off to school. They had only 2 sets each, so one was always in the wash, and she had to send them to school looking like they had no mother, had to think about them dirty at school all day. She didn't tell him about their little faces, blank and confused, staring back at her as she screamed, or how she'd made sharp claws of her hands and grabbed Jessie with them. The doctor had offered her a tissue and shuffled papers politely until she got her breath again. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her own name spoken aloud and tenderly. She admitted to him that she wasn't sleeping, that she was puking every morning and sometimes all day long, which she hadn't done with the other 3. She told him she was worried about the baby, though worry wasn't the right word for what she felt. What she felt was that none of it mattered, and it was supposed to matter, that she should care, but her caring existed only hypothetically, intellectually, in the future. She cared that the baby, male or female, would have to work like a dog every day of its life. She cared that her children were unlucky to have been born to her, that she and Joel couldn't seem to do right by any of them. Jackhorn was an insignificant pit surrounded by other insignificant pits that looked and smelled and sounded just like it, and it was the best they could do to switch pits every year, and sometimes every few months as the mines opened and closed and opened, and the men followed like bees swarming, subject to the whim of a mysterious, invisible queen. She also cared that she would have only an hour or 2 each day to give the baby, even if it was fussy or sick, because at least in this life, time was finite, and she already had 2 in diapers. She wasn't sure an hour was long enough to get to know another baby, and she didn't know how she was supposed to love a baby she didn't know. She felt like a cat with multiple litters, like her babies had been born into a kind of inevitable anonymity, a predetermined insignificance that had nothing to do with their spirits or personalities or gifts. This baby would be another confused blank face, another tiny open mouth into which she would spoon food, another heart she would let down, and the worst part of it all was that she was too busy to care. The doctor seemed even less worried than she, but she did take some comfort in his apathy, which diminished her own and even made her feel, for a fleeting moment, downright maternal. He said over his glasses that the nausea likely meant that this one was a girl, and she hoped he was right. After her eyes were dry, he gave her the tablets as if they had nothing to do with the scene she'd just made. And she felt mad at him for his careful manners, for reminding her how it felt to be looked after and noticed. She wondered if his wife thought herself lucky, or if his consideration dissolved when he crossed the threshold of their fine home. Work is work, she thought, and each of us has only so much to give. May was only 23, but she'd been married for 7 years, so she felt like she was 50. A spindly, drab little sapling in a patch of vigorous trees that naturally, robustly consumed all the water, all the food, all the light. There was Joel and their 2 little boys, Jesse and Tommy, who were 6 and 1, and another on the way. There was Joel's brother, Bill, and his children, Charles and Wanda and Opal, who were 7, 4, and 2, and whose mama had run off. And there was the shadow of the baby May had birthed just to watch him die, perfect except for a hole in his back the size of her pinky nail. Her mother had lost a child to the same affliction in the year before May was born. This was a fact she'd always known, and anyway, by the time her own baby died, May was so practiced at letting go that she didn't shed a tear when she stood over his grave, which had taken the men forever to carve from the frozen ground in late December. One of them, was it Joel, had finally relented and grabbed a pickaxe from the bed of a truck. But in the end, the grave was little more than a post hole, barely big enough for the cardboard box into which someone, her mother, had tucked the baby. Dreary sky, whipping wind, spitting snow. That day had been as ugly as it should, but she hadn't felt the weather or much of anything. Instead, she'd let her mind rest on her baby's face the last time she'd seen it, and the perfect peace that settled there, which made her feel, for just a moment, jealous. He had left her and lived now somewhere cleaner and lovelier than she could fathom. His body in heaven was whole. She believed this beyond a shadow of a doubt. She, on the other hand, felt every day like she was made up of holes, a leaky watering can, a human sieve. She told her bastard father-in-law that she'd named the baby Henry after him just to watch his face fall. The spectacle with the doctor left a sour taste in her mouth, and she ran through the scene in her mind several times on the walk home. Maybe she didn't want to take his pills, she thought. Maybe he was wrong and she didn't need them. She wanted him to be wrong about something. By the time she thanked the neighbor woman for watching Tommy and Wanda and Opal, her nerves were raw again. But she forced herself to be patient when the babies were excited to see her, when they tugged at her like little wretches around Jesus. She loved the story of the Savior and the bleeding woman and his hymn, how even in the throng he could feel the tug and heft of each desperate need. Her children were hungry, so she smeared a little margarine on some cold biscuits and then remembered a jar of jelly she was saving, one she'd been given as payment for showing a neighbor woman how to mix up a paste of baking soda and paint red, rashy skin with it. She broke the seal on the jar and added some to each biscuit, licking her fingers as she worked. She wasn't great in the kitchen because she didn't love to eat, but she could tell the jelly had been made by someone who did, who'd emptied a patch of wild fox grapes, sweet and musky, who'd picked over the fruit and sweetened it with honey and thickened it with some sour fruit, maybe crab apples. She screwed the lid back on and set her mind to save the rest for the next time she lost her temper. She set a couple of the sweetened biscuits back for Jesse and Charles when they got home from school. The food put the babies in a good mood, and they were content for a while to play quietly at the edge of the garden while she pulled weeds and picked tomatoes, green onion, and a little mustard to make her bland supper bean pot taste like something. She left them to play and went inside to make a fresh pan of biscuits, listening from the kitchen window as she worked the grease into the flour for any signs of injury or discord. She wiped down the table and swept the grit on the floor out the front door. Back outside, babies swarming like mosquitoes around her ankles, she spent the rest of the morning making sure that the following day everyone in her house would have clean clothes, hanging neatly from their respective nails on the newsprint-covered walls. She put Tommy and Wanda and Opal down for a nap, But Wanda wasn't having it, so she lifted the child from the bed, carried her to the porch, and paced back and forth, singing and patting her bottom to a tune she'd heard Doc do that Sunday at church. Then a darkness came down, and the rocks went around, and a cry pierced the sad leaden air. By the time Wanda fell asleep, May's arms felt like leaden air, so she settled in a chair on the porch and stroked the child's hair, pretty little hard-headed thing. She was missing her mother. May was sure of this, and she didn't have the heart to lay her down. Instead, they sat chest to chest, glued together with heat and sweat, until May had smoked half a pack of cigarettes. And it was kind of nice, she thought, having a good excuse to be still. Children were good at that, busy as they were, at slowing everything down. And frustrating as it was, she knew there was a kind of natural wisdom in their dawdling. She thought about Pauline, about where she was, and if she was happier away from it all. She wondered if happiness was even possible once a child had passed through your body, taking bits of you, blood and mineral and hope and bone, along with them as they went. May knew it didn't matter who you were or how much money you had. There was no returning to girlhood. She'd waited all day to retrieve the bottle from the only place in the house the children couldn't reach, high on a door frame, next to the only art that hung on her walls, a sepia picture of the rapture, of Jesus with his arms open wide and his enduring promise, I will come again to receive you. She waited until her children were fed and combed and wiped down with a soapy rag, until Tommy was down for the night and the rest were drawing pictures and practicing their letters on the scraps of paper, the receipts and envelopes she saved for them throughout the week. Any good, clean sheets of paper she set aside for the poems she scribbled before the house was awake, between loads of wash, when everyone else was eating. She'd waited until Joel and Bill, fresh from the bathhouse, had come and gone like spit and polished apparitions, appearing just long enough to be bored of her and short with the children, to leave their filthy laundry in bundles on the porch, to inhale the supper she made, thank her in grunts, and run away to God knows where. Around her, night was falling, and a hermit thrush had taken up singing somewhere close by. These were the moments May waited for. All the neighbors were back in their houses, and the cars were parked and silent. The unholy aroma of too many suppers cooking had faded into the cool dark, and the air smelled again like honeysuckle and water and earth. A breeze moved across her cheek, and it felt like the softest finger brushing her face. She wondered where Joel was, the bootleggers or the brothel or both. Somewhere in the Jackhorn woods with a bottle and a couple of beauties. Head down at another woman's kitchen table, or comfortable on her couch with a plate on his lap, or atop the quilts on her bed. May didn't have friends. She was old regular, a teetotaler, as strict with herself as her parents had been. Her husband, on the other hand, lived for a party and made everyone he met happy and hungry for more of him. She didn't know any man who wasn't in love with Joel. Even men hung on every word he said, though he acted like he barely noticed, and it made no difference to him either way. Whether he knew what he was doing, whether he craved attention and collected hearts like bottle caps just because he could, was what she was never sure of. Sometimes she took the children to her mother's house, and for a while the strict order and careful abundance was comforting. But she was lonely there, always had been, and she'd start to miss him. And just as if she'd conjured him with her wishing, he'd appear, large and looming at the edge of whatever room or yard she was in, and his face was a desperate question, blank and confused as the little boy's. His brown eyes would go black, and his throat would catch on her name, and suddenly everything he'd done wrong dissolved into nothing. And the sting went right out of it all as he undid the knot of her rust-colored hair. The skin on his fingertips was rough, and it caught on her hair as he pulled it forward around her face and clasped the sides of her head like her face was a jewel, and his hands, large and capable and utterly helpless, were the setting of a ring. The smile he saved for her was a quiet, serious smile, and it reminded her of the breadth of their story, of his horrid, lawless father, and the mines his dad had offered him up to when he was still a child, but already looked like a man. His strength and size had been a curse in this way, and he and his father worked together in the dark until Joel couldn't stand it anymore and quit, and lived like he wanted to for a few weeks, just to go back again, back down into the dark, first for his own kin and then for her and the children. When he worked, he had the broken bearing of a mine mule, plodding and impassive and rote, and she had learned quickly in their marriage that he could love her or he could toil for her, but he could not do both. Her mother was astonished, horrified, each time May went back, but she couldn't help it. She loved how her smallness, her bookishness, her lack of appetite, her refinement and religiosity somehow made sense and even shone brightly next to him. When he'd proposed to her, he'd been astounded by her acceptance, dumbfounded with pride, and she knew he bragged about her when he was out with his friends. Probably, she thought, even with the other women he enjoyed. And though his adultery infuriated her, she understood somehow that it had nothing to do with her, that he had married her, that he loved her because of all the things she would not do, because she was the most serious and solemn girl he'd ever met, because she needed nothing from nobody. Her own father had died when she was 2, and she didn't have a single memory of him. But sometimes, when Joel lifted her into his lap, the feeling was so close and warm, so familiar, that she thought maybe she did remember him in the part of her brain that did not have language. Her mother had remarried quickly to a preacher nobody liked, and he'd had his own beloved brood, even a girl her age, who was also called May. That was a terrible winter. She married Joel 4 years later. I'll stop there.
To a certain extent, Georgia the Lion is the one person at this workshop who needs absolutely no introduction whatsoever. Whether you're here with us in Heinemann or watching virtually in Viper, Vico, Versailles, Vancouver, Venice, Venezuela, or Vietnam. It is the 40th anniversary of her first published work, the poetry collection, Mountain. And I could have taken the easy route and spent my time up here recounting the many accomplishments of Georgia the Lion as a published author, the many awards and accolades she has rightfully received. But you already know all of that. Plus, to cover it all, the dozens of children's books, novels, nonfiction, plays, poetry collections, songs, anthologies, articles, we wouldn't have time to do it justice. Instead, I want to highlight an aspect of her life's work as a writer that isn't always acknowledged. And to start, in keeping with the times, I wanted to make an effort to extend a hand of welcome to those among us who have grown up with access, indeed with the power to click a button and instantaneously broadcast to the whole wide world who you are, where you're from, and where you stand on any of the many strands of chaos bringing change to the lives of everyone alive today. These powerful tools, the internet, social media, etc., have yanked those of us clinging to our Oxford commas headlong into this troubled time, sometimes struggling to recognize age-old ideas in the new vocabulary with which they have clothed themselves. So, for the younger ones among us, here goes. George L. Lyon is a goat in the modern renaissance of Appalachian literature. And when it comes to the literary heritage of our mountains, she is an OG. Now, for those of us who, like me, might have heard these terms and not really known what they mean, GOAT, G-O-A-T, is short for greatest of all time. And equally, and maybe even more pertinent to this introduction, OG is short for original gangster. Because make no mistake, George L. Lyon is an original gangster in the modern renaissance of Appalachian literature. And my friends, she is also a mother to us all in this community of souls who gather as the Appalachian Writers Workshop. My favorite prose work by George Ella is her memoir, Don't You Remember, a book that is often not mentioned when someone has to choose only a slice of her monumental opus as a representative sample. In the book, she wrestles with the ever-tangled web of memory, history, time, place, and truth we all encounter in the lifelong effort to answer the question, who am I? The question, who are we, is one we should also regularly ask collectively. What does it mean to call ourselves Appalachian writers, to be members of the community of regional artists? When I ask myself these questions, I hear Georgella saying, don't you remember? Do we remember? In my research for this introduction, I came across a typewritten transcript of an interview Chris Green did with Gurney Norman at Gurney's home back in 1990. It's a treasure chest of stories where Gurney lays out from the beginning the history of what we now call the modern renaissance of Appalachian literature. And right there in the middle of it, from the beginning, is George L. Lyon. Gurney's recounting traces our tradition back to the mid-'70s, and it goes through the creation of the Southern Appalachian Writers Collective. But the piece that I want to point out is in 1979, when on Gurney's first day at the University of Kentucky, he goes into the director's office. He's on the phone. The director says, "Come on in," and the person on the other end of the phone was from the Witter Benner Foundation for Poetry in New Mexico, and they were going to give the Southern Appalachian Writers Collective a grant for $20,000 to encourage and nourish the writing and appreciation of poetry in the Southern Mountains. And Gurney says, "I divided the money into two parts, $10,000 and $10,000. I said that I, as a faculty member, would be an unpaid director of this project, and I said that I need two assistants. I need one person to be the brains of things, and, in other words, the executive director, the one who does all the work. And that must be George L. Lyon, Dr. George L. Lyon, fine poet, scholar, and so on," Gurney says. And then in the same year, Chris Green also interviewed Georgella and asked her about when her life as an activist began. "When do you think you became an activist?" She says, "In college, in the 60s, as part of the free preschool movement in Danville, picketing to integrate the barbershop, and before that, when Pete Seeger came to the Kingdom Come Swap and Meet for a concert. In college, she marched against the Vietnam War. Georgella wrote an op-ed piece in outrage at Kentucky's suit to stop the EPA's enforcement of the Clean Water Act and make Kentucky a sanctuary for the coal industry. Georgella wrote and performed the song Just a Mountain on a collection of songs by Kentucky musicians singing out against mountaintop removal. And her work as an activist and writer continues today. You know the phrase, actions speak louder than words. Georgella's lifetime of work teaches us that words are actions and have their own ability to call down the power of creation, destruction, and change. One of my favorite poems by Georgella says, "I need some big loud woman to listen to." We certainly are in need of some big loud women these days. We are so lucky to have our very own with us this week. Her body of work is massive, and her words are loud enough that they are heard and read around the globe. Georgella's published works, in both their reach and their number, have grown so deep and wide that they reach all around planet Earth, taking the true magic of Appalachia and our literary heritage not just beyond the mountains, but across the oceans, past language barriers and cultural differences, shattering stereotypes and limitations along the way. That is the work of an activist. The magic of Georgella's writing is multifaceted in the work it performs on every reader who encounters her words. She shines a loving light of recognition on the faces of our people whose voices have too often been shamed into silence or sold for cheap laughs. And she teaches us that our words, like hers, are there to light our way forward. I want to read the opening and closing stanzas from her poem, Bringing Light. I write this poem out of darkness, to you who are also in darkness, because our lives demand it. I tell you that the darkness has been ours. Words will give our eyes, opened in promise, a growing light. In reading and researching for this introduction, I randomly began to collect just random individual words from her writing that she spoke in interviews and also directly from her writing. And then I put them in alphabetical order with no effort to make them into anything. But because they were Georgella's words, magic happened. It is a testament to her power as a writer that as I read this list of words, you would know, even if I hadn't told you, that they came directly from Georgella Lyon. So I'm going to close with what I call the vocabulary of, sorry, just a second. The alphabet of a loud, wordful woman. And I don't do all the letters because she's not through writing, so we need to get, so she'll finish the story when she decides to. Okay, here we go. Appalachia, activist. Artemis Alathair. Billy Branch. Bin, basket. Borrowed, book, braids. Corn, coffee, caramel. Citizen center, crossing Catalpa. Dynamite. Dutch elm. Earth from fire. Forsythia, forest, forks. Gladys, growing. Harlan, house builder. Heart, harvest. Hammer, home. Indiana, imaging. Joey, justice. Kingdom come. Kentucky Library Laureate, Lion Keeper, Light, Love, Loud, Mountaintop March Mother, Mini Mountain, 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 Musician, Mentor, Maker, Noah, Niagara, Never Ending, Outcry, Overflow, Public Poet, Peaceful Protester, Pledge Poem, Remember, Ruby River, Receiving Ruth Stone, Story, Song, Sign. Starfinder, Sharing Sleep Song. Sing, Troublesome Tiger. Tale Teacher, Time Threads, Truth Tide. Trees Together Up, Unlock. Voice Place, Vista. Virginia West Wolfwork. Wales Water Woodswoman. Writer, Weaving Worlds, Where Words Witness Wounds. Wonder, wander, welcome. And with that, join me in welcoming Georgella Lyon.
Yes, I believe it. I believe it will. Well, I don't know what to say about that. That was incredible. And I do so love the alphabet. It's so wonderful to be here again, isn't it? For those of us who are old timers. Deep thanks to all who have worked to make it possible, to the work the settlement school has done throughout this crisis, and to the home we get to return to. I was saying to somebody a little while ago that in a way, I grew up as a writer here.
I first came in 1970 because of Gurney. Gurney got me here. And then the community, then the community begins to form, and so much to treasure and to learn and to share. I feel deeply grateful. So this first poem, this is all, except for one poem, this is all new work. It's kind of odd. I'm just beginning to realize how odd I really am. And, because Melissa, you said something about haiku. I've been writing these, I call them raiku. And one of them is, she had been so young, she thought long in the tooth and old fart were metaphors. So this poem, the title comes from a poem by Ruth Thompson. The voices come through. Ruby, my mother's mother, and Joe, my father's, never had words with or for each other. Joe being born down on Brownies Creek, her father a primitive Baptist preacher, but only, it was said, after he was too old to sin. Ruby, Arkansas born, but Memphis nurtured. Cultured, she might have said, but didn't have to. Her stepfather was a timber broker, which is what landed her in the arms of a lumberman whose living was in the trees, which were in the mountains, which is how I wound up with one. Wow. That was the big loud part. Which is how I wound up with one grandmother who said, I'm a little under the weather, and the other who said, I feel like a stewed witch. There comes a time when you realize you're not going to be anybody else. This is it, really. And, you may revise poems, but as for you, so they were the kind of people who painted around the upright piano because it was too heavy to move. Besides, it only had 3 wheels. The kind of people who didn't miss what fell behind it. A black and white drawing of Schaffhausen, not far from Zurich, where the husband had had a job playing piano in the Rio bar. The wife and their 4-year-old had gone too. They'd lived above the bar, their apartment opposite the room where the strip club dancers changed clothes. Do we know those ladies? The son asked. The couple had long ago forgotten about the drawing, just as the husband had long since given up playing that piano. He had 3 keyboards upstairs in his studio. Back when he'd taught lessons on the sun porch in their rental house, that golden oak piano had been vital. Now you couldn't give it away. They'd had to pay to be relieved of all that music, lying on its back at the landfill now, way out Georgetown Road. Years ago, this is going to be a lurch. Years ago, 30 years ago, as a matter of fact, I wrote a poem called Where I'm From. I don't know how many of you may have written it or taught it. It's gotten around. But of course, as I do it with students or just it just has become a place I return to, that form, and it's capacious. So so I've written lots over the years, and this one is from 2018. I feel compelled to read it because there's a well-funded, malevolent movement to deny our history as a country, to ban both books that tell the truth about slavery, racism in all its manifestations, Japanese internment camps, persecution and devastation of Native Americans, the ongoing force of violence against women. We can never address what is tearing us apart if we refuse to face our history. So, this is where I'm from, 2018. I'm from the cries of families sundered at our southern border, while Lady Liberty faces a filthy sea. I'm from all white, able-bodied, well-off hetero men are created equal. And here, Puerto Rico, have some paper towels. I'm from our predator-in-chief who brags about grabbing pussy and mocks a woman who was sexually abused. I'm from the countries we bombed or clear-cut or destabilized to get what we wanted. I'm from the 7 deadly sins confused with the American dream. I'm from the whole pilgrim whitewash, our refusal to admit the land we stole, the Indians we slaughtered, the Africans we chained to build our wealth. I'm from their descendants, gunned down on the street. I'm from children ripped from their parents' arms when the ship docked at the auction block in the field. I'm from their blood and bones, feeding the ground I stand on. This next poem is about something that happened shortly after my mother's death in 2009. And I remember the moment at the visitation when I was, you know how you're kind of holding yourself up by the shoulders, you know, or you're on the hanger of yourself or something. And in came Mike Mullins, the director then, Frida, Silas, Jason, Mary Ann. It was such an incredible, just incredible to have that family there. So, 3 months, look, we've got work to do now. Behave. 3 months past my mother's death, I see a sign in a New Age bookstore, massage, Reiki, readings. Heavy with grief, I think a laying on of hands might do me good. Later, at the back of the shop, I go through a door into a tiny massage room. The therapist introduces herself, asks if I want a reading too. I most certainly do not, I think. No, thank you, I say. Her work is gentle and thorough, and when she's done, the knotted rope of my body has become a hammock. Once I'm dressed, she comes back in saying, I know you don't want a reading, but my guides have a message for you. There's no charge. Will you listen? Okay, I tell her. Be happy, she says, and I burst into tears. When I can get the words out, I say, I can't be happy. My mother just died. Will you say your mother's name? Gladys Hoskins, I tell her, giving each syllable the pressure she gave. Be happy. She closes her eyes. This woman knows nothing of me or my mother, who was 89 when she left us, 89 and working full-time till 3 weeks before she passed, who promised me she'd go to the doctor as I drove 3 hours to her house, who went to a meeting instead. Your mother, the healer begins, leaning on the weight of each word, is very busy. She wants you to stop worrying about her. Who says the dead are busy? Really? Okay. Classic. Now, there was a story told to me. You have to choose between perfection of the life and perfection of the work, which means, of course, that women cannot be serious because we bear children, and for the most part, don't abandon them. Life chooses us. Guys give but a squirt to the 9-month, round-the-clock, intricate, invisible labor of creating someone new, someone who will laugh and dance, who will open her eyes and give new vision to the world. Men take refuge in studios, bars, offices, gyms, boardrooms, and all else declarative places to debate that question of perfection. On Broadway, George Seurat has neither time nor francs enough to support his mistress or feed their child. He is painting perfection in Stephen Sondheim's play about the purity of art unsullied by those who bleed without wounds or those who wake in the night to be fed. Getting in the way of vision. It's beautiful, all right, like Bluebeard's castle. Scott Fitzgerald tells us Gatsby knew when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable vision to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. Poor sod. We all know if it weren't for women, men would be immortal. Except, of course, there wouldn't be any men. Eve works in foundations, bras, girdles, merry widows. She sells undies, 32A to 48D, cotton, nylon, rigid, racy. She sells what binds and defines, lifts and separates, squeezes in and pushes out. What makes a woman shape out of the soft swing and flow of female flesh, makes cones out of curves, taut from loose, soft into hard. She buys here too. Oh, Eve, stripped in the wavery light of the Ben Snyder dressing room. Remember when you walked ecstatic and naked in the garden? At home in the roll of you, round and luscious, how firm a foundation was that? And I wanted to end with a verse of a song. I wrote these words for a tune you'll recognize during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings when I was crazy with rage and heartbreak. And so this is a matriarchic song. Oh, beautiful our body shapes, our ample ways of grace, our plump or bony majesty, our spirit's dwelling place. A miracle, God finds her face in thee, and crowns thy good with sisterhood, from she to shining
Can I get one more round of applause for all of our leaders this evening? Well, I hope you all had a wonderful first day or first evening here at Heinemann. If there's any, before we conclude, any announcements, any questions? It really is bright, y'all. I ain't joking. Yes, sir. Yeah, well, we did, but we can do it again. I'm sorry, but we can recognize them again. Who's our first timer? Yeah. There we go. Thank you. We're so happy to have it. I believe by my count, there's around about 50 of our 100 participants this is your first time here with us in Heinemann tonight. So we're so grateful to have you here. As I have said, by all means, if we can make your time more enjoyable, more comfortable, more anything, please do not hesitate to let any of us staff members know. With that, Melissa, yes.